Hi, this is Pari Sarnaut from Sentinel, and today I am doing a video on legitimate interest, which is one of the 6 legal bases for processing personal data under GDPR. In this video, I'll cover a little bit on the background on the legitimate interest as a legal basis, what a balancing test is, stages of the test, how should business prepare for it, what does a typical assessment process looks like, and then few examples of LIA tests and its results. Under GDPR, one must have a lawful basis in order to process personal data in line with the lawfulness, fairness, and transparency principle. Legitimate interest is just one of the legal bases, but a very important one. Reason being, like other lawful bases, it is not centered around a particular purpose, like performance of a contract or to meet legal obligations. Moreover, it is not a processing that an individual has given consent for or particularly agreed to. It is more flexible and could in principle apply to any processing which is reasonable. And because it could be applied to a wide range of circumstances, it puts onus on the business to demonstrate that their legitimate interest and the necessity of processing balances or outweighs the interests, rights, and freedom of individuals whose data is being processed in that particular circumstance. In order to rely on legitimate interest as a legal basis, the balancing test must balance in favor of the business. However, in some cases where processing might have some negative impact on the users, this doesn't necessarily mean that their interest would always override business interest. There are other factors considered in the test like severity of the impact of such processing, what are the compensating controls which are put in place to protect the individual interest. Again, there could be compelling interest of the business which may justify some impact on the individuals. Let's quickly look at the 3-stage test, which covers the key areas necessary to perform the analysis. The first stage involves identification of the legitimate interest, which is essentially what is the purpose of processing? What are we planning to do with that data? Is it necessary to meet any organizational goals or objectives of third party who will be processing the data on your behalf? The second stage involves carrying out necessity test, wherein the benefits to the organization are evaluated. Why is it necessary to share the data with a third party? If there is any other way to achieve the objective, avoiding the processing activity completely, or use the personal data in a way which is more protective of individuals' privacy. And then there is the third and the final stage, where we carry out a balancing test, where we evaluate other aspects like, would the individual expect the processing to take place? What is the user's benefit? In any way, can the user get negatively impacted? What is the downside if this processing doesn't happen? Can the individual control or object to this processing activity? And lastly, what are the compensating controls that are put in place to preserve the rights of individuals? For example, are we adhering to data minimization, de-identification? Have we put additional layers of encryption in place? Do we have a multi-factor authentication, restricted access, opt-out options, etc.? Before engaging with the privacy team to conduct and document the assessment, it is always a best practice to gather information beforehand with respect to the project, which would typically include details on the processing activity, who is the data controller, what is the business user relationship, third party with whom the data will be shared, user privacy notice coverage, etc. Similarly, information on collection and usage, deletion, disclosure, and security and privacy controls in place to protect the data should be collected. Organizations with mature privacy programs may have an efficient process to conduct legitimate interest assessments. But here is an example for the others who are still in the process of establishing one. This would start with business and privacy teams working together to understand the planned use of data. Business would complete the legitimate interest assessment questionnaire, This questionnaire is generally drafted by privacy team. If not, you can get one from the outside counsels who are familiar with all the aspects that need to be covered in the three-stage test. Privacy team will then review the completed questionnaire and recommend additional controls if needed. Business would implement controls, and as a final step, the privacy team would approve and sign off. Now, let's look at some examples of LEA where business wants to rely on legitimate interest. In this first example, business wants to retain suspended account data which is associated with fraudulent users for fraud prevention. In this case, it is in the legitimate interest of the business to retain this data, to identify returning fraudsters and block them in future to keep the platform safe and secure. From necessity standpoint, this processing is necessary for detecting fraud and there is no other way for the business to identify bad actors. In this case, the test would balance in favor of the business as it's not only beneficial for the business but also to its users as this reduces the risk of account takeovers. Also, the individuals would expect this processing as per this company's user privacy notice. Now let's look at another example where a business wants to share its customers' address with third parties who sell related products to send mailers. In this case, business wants to earn recommendation fee. As you can see, this clearly cannot be argued to be a legitimate interest of the company and the users would not be expecting their data to be shared unless they have explicitly opted in. In this case, the balancing test balances in favor of the individuals and fails. The recommendation in this case would be to use consent as a legal basis with an option to opt out at any time. I hope you found this video informative and interesting. Please feel free to ping me in case you have any questions, want to learn more about LIAs, or want to discuss any use case where you want to rely on legitimate interest as a legal basis. Thanks again for watching this video.